All right, as we begin chapter 12, I want you to take a moment to think about how emotion and motivation are related. What do they have in common? When you think of emotion, what do you think of? When you think of motivation, what do you think of? What's similar? When I've discussed this in the past with my classes, when students think of, they tend to think of sort of emotion, happy and sad, and they think of sort of the emotions that they feel. And when they think of motivation, they think of, okay, being motivated to get up and do something. And they think of them as quite distinct. So they know that they're related, but on the whole, they think of emotion and motivation as quite different. And some of the things that, the different aspects about them what separates emotion and motivation is that emotion is sort of more along the lines of feelings, whereas motivation is related to goal pursuit. So this is typically what a discussion around these sorts of questions brings up in a class. And all of those points are very, very valid. But we're going to be learning more in this chapter about how emotion and motivation are highly linked together. And the first step of that process is to learn what the scientific definitions of emotion and motivation are. Because how we think of them in sort of lay terms is a bit different than what are their scientific definitions. So an emotion, this is the scientific definition, is a relatively brief episode of synchronized responses, including bodily responses, facial expressions, and subjective evaluation, that indicate the evaluation of an internal or external event as significant. And so this is really important. The key, of course, is this synchronized responses and the evaluation of an internal or external event as significant. So what is it that we have emotions about? Do we tend to have emotions about really insignificant things? No, we don't tend to have emotions at the really insignificant stuff. Sometimes we'll tell ourselves that what we're feeling right now is really not that significant in the grand scheme of things, but it's usually quite significant in the heat of the moment. So our emotions really signal or indicate what aspects of our lives are significant or not so significant. And the synchronized responses that we have, this includes, again, bodily responses, facial expressions. One's pretty easy. The facial expressions that you read from others. Is it going to be a sad facial expression? Is it going to be a happy facial expression? Surprised, fearful. The subjective evaluation, that refers to the fact that it's personalized, so how one person would view it. So what is significant or not significant is going to vary based on person. And emotions are entirely subjective. They may share similarities with other people, is that, again, most people would think of death as something sad, for example. But on the whole, how your emotions surrounding an event are very personal. They are subjective. They are how you yourself is evaluating it, not how other people are evaluating it. So your own thoughts surrounding an event. And then we have bodily responses. So this includes what? Think for a second about what type of bodily responses would be included in the definition of emotion. What are the types of reactions that you tend to evoke when you are feeling emotional? If you're feeling threatened, you're going to have an increase in pulse rate. Your pupils could dilate. Your heart could beat faster. You could sweat. In general, if you're feeling very aroused, so whether it would be arousal from threat, or you can also be aroused by something that you desire, a person that you're attracted to, that could also cause some of the same reactions. You can have increased heart rate, pupil dilation. You could also start to sweat. So you can have some of those bodily responses that are similar, but in order for you to interpret those bodily responses, you need to know context. And That context can include facial expressions, that sort of are you in facial expressions of ecstasy or pain, and how you're feeling at the moment. Is this sad? Is this happy? You could have mixed states. So this all of these elements comprise the definition of emotion. And on the whole, an emotion is the cognitive interpretation of subjective feelings in your body. So they did a study a while back where they had people meet for the very first time, and they had them meet in one of two places. So they either had them sort of meet on a street corner, and just sort of then you'd rate how attractive this other person was, or they had them meet at the top of a very tall bridge, and so they would be high up in the air. And so they would then have these two people would meet, and they would have them rate how attractive they thought the other person would be. And what they found was that the attractiveness ratings varied significantly by the location of the meeting. And that the people that met at the top of this this tall bridge, where they could sort of see over the side and had this sort of feeling of height, that they rated the attractiveness of the other person as significantly higher than when they met on the street corner. And this is a really great example of the cognitive interpretation of subjective feelings, because what they would do, the reason that these attractiveness ratings were so much higher on the bridge was that the people on the bridge were becoming aroused because they were high up in the air. So there were height instances, and that if you're high up in the air, then you're going to have a heightened state of arousal. As human beings that tend to walk on the ground, being higher up in the air is going to make us in a state of readiness to respond to potential changes, and we're just going to be more aroused. And so what the participants in that study did is that they cognitively interpreted that increased state of arousal and attributed it to the person that they were meeting instead of the environmental context that they were in. And so this is a really great example of how our emotions really do reflect interpretation, because our body is just doing what our body is doing. And we then are going to take that information and try to put it in context and try to interpret its meaning. Motivation, on the other hand, is a propensity to action that is a component of some affective response. So, motivation is linked with emotion. You think about the things that you are motivated to pursue. So you are motivated to pursue goals, and you are motivated to pursue these goals, to attend class, to listen to the lectures that I post, to go to work every day for some sort of goal in mind. And it could be money. It could be, there's things that you want to buy that you want. It could be that you want to go to school to get a better job that you like. So you are motivated to pursue these things. And your motivation relates directly to some sort of emotional response about what you're trying to get. So you can have an idea about, well, I want to have a job that I enjoy, that is meaningful and is intellectually stimulating. Then you have very strong emotions or desires around trying to get that job. And your motivation, how motivated you are, is a direct reflection of how much you want that particular state, how much you want that sort of affective state. You can also be highly motivated to avoid things. So I can take the same sort of example and say, why do you attend classes and why do you listen to all my lectures? Because maybe you don't really know the type of job that you do want, but you know the type of job that you don't want. You don't want some job that you just go to and it's boring and you don't make a whole lot of money and you're not happy. So then you are motivated to obtain an educational degree, to do some of these additional enrichment activities through school or whatever, so that you can avoid something that you don't like. So motivation has an approach element and it has an avoidance element. So you will approach things that you desire, that you want, that you feel positively about, and you can also then try to avoid things that you don't want to accomplish, that you things that you feel negative about, and we'll be talking more about emotions that are associated with avoidance in a couple of slides. So emotions may also be classified along the dimension of motivation. So a component of an emotional reaction is that the motivation is to either approach an object, an event, or stimulus, or to withdraw from it. So this is just as I talked about. There's three primary approach emotions. There's happiness, surprise, and anger. And so approach emotions are not just universally negative or positive. You can have an approach emotion. Anger is an approach emotion. You can be feeling very negatively towards someone, and you can be very, very angry at them. Most of the time when you're very angry, you are feeling very negative, but it's not something where you disengage. Anger is fundamental engagement. You approach, you are engaging with the stimulus. When you react, you are not retreating, you are not backing away. Withdrawal emotions are sadness, disgust, and fear. And sadness, disgust, and fear, you retreat when you see these. When things are sad, you tend to withdraw. Disgust, you will back away. Disgust is highly advantageous for you. Things that are disgusting or would be more likely to be poisonous or bad for your body. And so a disgust reaction is very, very strong. So once you've had food poisoning or you have some sort of extreme disgust reaction, it can be really hard to overcome it. And then you also have fear, that you fear for yourself, you fear for a loved one, so you will back away or you withdraw in an effort to protect yourself. Now, we've been talking about emotions, we've been talking about motivation, and a really important factor in these is that they are fundamentally linked to stimulation. And our brain has an inherent need to be stimulated. And we have emotions, we are motivated to pursue particular things, and this is linked to that idea that your brain needs to be stimulated. And to give you an idea, most of you guys are students, and full-time students, so you're all students because you're taking this class. But if you are, say you are a full-time student, or you have any time when or if you're working full-time and you have some vacation, you have an extended period of time. Over the summer, for example, after school begins, you say, oh, this is great, I'm just going to sit around, I'm going to relax all day, I'm not going to do anything, it's going to be awesome. And then you get home, and maybe that works for 2 to 3 days, but on the third or fourth day, you start to feel like bored, this isn't really fun. And so this is an element of that. Your brain fundamentally likes to be stimulated, and it finds stimulation really, really rewarding. So one of the reasons that you get up and you go to work each day and you go to class and you try to engage in enriching activities is because your brain fundamentally finds it rewarding to get stimulated, to learn new things, to engage in interpersonal reactions. And so this incoming information from the environment is rewarding to your brain. It likes to process information. And if it doesn't have anything to process over long periods of time, in terms of something that can be linked with aging, that if you have prolonged periods of time where you are not engaging and your brain is not being stimulated, then it can also be linked with neglect and cognitive decline. So in line with this idea of being stimulated, I want you to think a moment about what happens when you are deprived of your cell phone. And this is going to be a participation question that is posted online. And so now that you've got this, then you can pause where you are in this video and you can fill out the posted participation question. And after you take a look at how your response then compares to your classmates who have already responded. So when you are deprived of your cell phone, if you've left it at home or something like that, or if you've lost it, how do you feel? Do you feel lost, depressed, relieved, concerned, or disconnected? So these are the choices. So pause the video now and take a second to respond and then come back. So you can think about how people respond so far. When this is typically done in class, what happens is that most people say that they feel disconnected, and this is what was said recently. But it can very much vary by person. People report saying that it feels like a part of their body is missing, that it can almost be a little bit painful, sometimes not knowing what text or email you're missing. And so this idea of a constant need for stimulation, I want you to keep that in your mind while you're watching this brief video.
I saw him pull out of the parking lot and turn right, and the box is still stuck under his car. So who knows how long he was driving with that box under his car? I bet he got home, he pulled into his driveway.
Out in the sky. I'm not. Wow. You're like, it's not. It's not.
I don't think it's real. I don't think it's real.
I see the lineup for power. We see the Empire State Building is like really close to it.
So I think that clip is interesting because we do rely on our phone for a great deal of sensory stimulation. And it's also interesting because as human beings, we are oftentimes especially responsive to novel information. And so your phone offers an outlet for continual novel stimuli, which wouldn't typically be present. And that we do, of course, have this tendency to be more sensitive to novel stimuli because it signals change, and it signals something that then we should therefore be more mindful of and pay more attention to, because like, oh, here's a change. It could be something that's possibly significant, so let's pay attention to it. But if we have so much changing stimuli and so much novelty, and that does not nowadays align with significance, whereas at one time, change could have had been much more likely to align with significance. That if you had a change in routine, it could signal illness, it could signal famine, it could signal a change in access to resources, and that's not the type of thing that we have nowadays. And yet we're still sensitive to some of the novelty that it would have been advantageous for us to, at one time, process more fully. And so I think this is also one of the reasons that cell phones and electronics in general are becoming overused, is because of this sort of sensitivity towards novel information. And you now have movements that are really focused on savoring information, and that trying to take out that novelty of basically engaging through your cell phone and savoring it for you personally. Because then when you do watch stuff through your cell phone, you can take away that personal, real sort of aware, you are in the moment element that can actually affect your memory, and that you can then not have as much memory for the information because you were not as personally there and as relevant. So I bring this up now because we're really starting in this chapter and in subsequent ones to build on a lot of the information that you've learned so far in this course. So we're going to be moving from some more bio-heavy into application of that biological knowledge to understand more about what is going on with you in your world, in your environment. What are the behaviors that you care about? Learning more about those, psychopathology, eating behavior problems, these things that are some of the reasons that you took this class, we're going to be moving into more of some of that content here. So I'm going to be pulling out pieces that really highlight some of the knowledge that you've learned and how you can now start to think about information differently now that you've learned about how the body works. For novelty in particular, the sensitive change, neurons are more sensitive to sometimes processing change because of particular patterns of information. And so now you have an idea of how it is that we have, as more of a evolving species, become more sensitive to or more dependent upon our cell phones and stuff like that.